Liam, I mean, first of all, you've met the man. What's he like in the flesh?
Well, I first met Vladimir Putin in the mid-1990s. Just after the breakup of the Soviet Union, he was working for the mayor of St. Petersburg, who was a very liberal politician called Anatoly Sobchak, a very Western-oriented politician, a politician very interested in bringing foreign investment into what had just become, the new country of Russia, having broken away from the Soviet Union. So Putin really, back in those days, hitched his wagon to the most kind of pro-reformist politician in the country. And when I met him, and he speaks pretty good English, by the way, he speaks very, very good German. When I met him, he was trying to drum up foreign investment for what was Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, Russia's second city, a city of 6-7 million people. And he was pretty good at it. He was pretty good at wooing Western investors, Western journalists, convincing them that Russia had changed, convincing them that Russia was a major commercial opportunity. And in the years that followed, there were ups and downs and lumps and bumps. It was a major commercial and economic opportunity. And that's why, Alex, in the 30 years since the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union was dissolved, many thoroughbred Western companies have invested very, very heavily in Russia indeed. And many of them now, of course, are rushing for the door.
I mean, Putin, in that respect, was a marked change from his predecessors. He essentially pivoted from communism to capitalism. But let's talk a little bit about how he may have got there. I mean, this man grew up in relative poverty, ended up being an officer in the KGB. What can you tell us about the journey of young Putin to the president of Russia?
Well, Putin was born in what was Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, really at the height of the Soviet Union. He was born the year before Stalin died. He was born in 52, Stalin died in 53. Stalin was then replaced by Nikita Khrushchev, who was much more reformist and who criticized Stalin famously, but was still very much a Soviet leader who would butt heads with the West when he banged his shoe famously and said, "We will bury you." He promoted the Soviet Union as a sort of technological force. And that's the atmosphere that Vladimir Putin grew up in. Like many very, very bright young people, he joined the security services. That wasn't unusual. This was a totalitarian dictatorship, of course. But Putin's of that generation where they grew up getting to the top of one society, and that society then completely collapsed. So they had to rapidly reinvent themselves. And he did reinvent himself. He went from working for Sobchak as a kind of special advisor, you'd call it here in the UK. Then he became the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, and then he segued to Moscow. A lot then, back in the mid and late 90s, when I was living in Russia the first time, I also lived in Russia in 2010 for a few years onwards, in the early 2010s. Back in those days, though, in the mid-90s, the Moscow government was dominated by smart, scientific, technocratic people from St. Petersburg, of which Vladimir Putin was definitely one, because that St. Petersburg set, Yegor Gaidar was another a well-known Russian reformer. They were seen as the more outward-looking, more modern members of that previous Soviet elite that would take Russia towards capitalism. And for much of his presidency, and he's been president formally since the year 2000, there was a sort of interregnum period where Dmitry Medvedev became president for between 2008 and 2012. But he's basically been the president of Russia since 1999-2000. And during much of the early part of that presidency, he was a very outward-looking president. He did help to bring lots of foreign direct investment to Russia. You'll remember, Alex, after 9/11 in 2001, Putin was pretty much the first global leader who phoned Bush, and Bush was very moved, and they met, and the Russians said to the Americans, if you want to base yourself in former Soviet countries, in Kazakhstan, if you want to attack Afghanistan from our bases, that's fine. And George Bush famously said, when I look into his eyes, I can see his soul of Vladimir Putin. How far we've come since then, when there was quite a lot of rapprochement. And of course, at that time, Putin was suggesting, well, maybe we can join NATO. And at that time, that wasn't a joke. How far we've come.